Little Red Riding Hood is a fairy tale that the majority of us are familiar with. There are certain morals, lessons, and sexual innuendos that should be considered when reading fairy tales in general. Double meanings and falsehoods convey alternative meanings nested in subliminal or allegorical messages. Little Red Riding Hood and her journey through the woods can have various interpretations, focusing on her rite of passage into womanhood, and thus her ultimate transformation from innocence into experience. One of the oldest mediums of transferring knowledge from one generation to the next is with the use of stories. Storytelling is developed through both oral circulation and written confirmation.
This is a terrible thing to say, but it's true. I have very great difficulty in understanding. I've got to take 26 letters, turn them into words, try and understand them. But if you say something to me, I look into your eyes and I say, does she know what she's talking about? Does she believe what she's saying? Why is she saying it? Why is she saying it to me? Why is she saying it to me now?
Fables and fairy tales, in essence, are a mechanism to socialize children. They teach us of the do's and don'ts of society, the gender roles that are assigned to us, the way we should act and think and behave, given popular norm, our sense of self, and of course the teachings of the self versus the other.
Little Red has a hotly debated literary history. The version most closely associated with today's telling, by Charles Perrault, surfaced in 1695, followed by the Grimm brothers in 1812. However, the tradition of the little girl and the big bad wolf can be traced back to oral tales in France, Britain, and Italy as early as 1022, when a church scholar set down in Latin verse what he identified as stories from the local peasants in a primer for catechism instruction. The written works which provide the basis of our comparison to Little Red Riding Hood are The Adventures of Chrétien de Troyes, the grotesque consumption within Rabelais, and the construction of the romantic adventure as emphasized by Cervantes. An adventure can be identified as an undertaking of a wild or exciting nature. During the course of the adventure, the journey and the destination are the primary focus and of critical importance. The archetype of the medieval adventure can be found in the narratives of the Crusades. However, as the centuries passed, the knight's journey to Jerusalem became less important than the structure of the allegorical journey, as seen in Little Red's pilgrimage to her grandmother's home through the woods.
During the time that Little Red Riding Hood was created, around 17th century France, there was a flux in werewolf trials which were similar to witch trials. Little Red Riding Hood is likely based upon the trials and tribulations of werewolves and their threat to people at that time.
The forest, a literary trope which handily encapsulates the dangers of the world, both moral and physical, becomes the stage for Red's transformation.
There is this path to Grandma's house that Little Red Riding Hood could follow, and I think according to the tale should be following, because the wolf would not get to her on this path. The wolf only really sort of gains access to her because Little Red Riding Hood strays away from sort of the safety of society and sort of enters into the wilderness of the forest, and sort of in that wilderness it's a place where nature is sort of dominant over man-made culture, and I think the wolf sort of embodies that.
The plot of Little Red Riding Hood shows the conflict between autonomy and compliance with authority. Little Red decides on her own, through her developing autonomy, that she does not need to live by authority, the rules given to her by her mother.
Little girl, I'm Little Red Riding Hood, I'll have you know, and I'm not afraid of anything.
In psychology, when autonomy is reached, the individual is said to no longer need authority to govern their decisions.
I've traveled this way 100 times, and I've never seen a wolf around here, ever.
In Little Red, this parallel is seen in her developing femininity and ascent into adulthood. The conflict between the two is usually dangerous because one is dealing with the ideals of their internal obligation to reach a state of autonomy, and yet to continue living within the boundaries laid out by their authoritative figures. In this case, Little Red fails at human intuition of autonomy and neglects the authoritative rules that were set up initially to protect her.
Little Red is viewed as a sexually charged female that is between the stages of youth and womanhood. Her red hood is significant in representing her recent baptism or menstruation, while the hood itself is a phallic symbol that represents male sexuality.
The color red is sort of crucial. I think the menstruation is an interesting reading of it, sort of symbolizing Little Red Riding Hood as a sort of, then as a kind of fecund, sort of, ready to give birth.
This depicts Little Red as transversing a space of hypersexualized curiosity. Freud would say that Little Red was suffering from a case of severe denial when she begins her interactions with the wolf at her grandmother's cottage.
In Freudian terms, It's the inability or unwillingness to accept truth despite any given evidence supporting this truth.
She sees the wolf teeth, notices how hairy he is, and yet still interacts with this being as if it were her grandmother. One could argue that the reason for her denial is caused by her sexual curiosity, which in this case leads her into a daunting adventure. Is she interacting with the wolf to satisfy an underlying desire to reach womanhood? Is she taunting the wolf with her hypersexualized image? Or is she simply suffering from childish naivete?
It's almost her fault that she's seeking out and, primping herself and making her wanting to, as if she wants to be sexually abused or taken advantage of, which is always a theme that's disturbing and unfortunate.
Freud would say that Little Red Riding Hood is suffering from a term that he coined as the Oedipus complex. Her sexually charged nature and obsession with penis envy leads her directly into the hands of male danger. This divergent male role splits the male's image of a threatening animal, the wolf, and a benign hunter, the father figure. Freud explained that in order to overcome penis envy, the female must re-engage herself with her mother and overcome the sexual fascination of her father. This is expressed in the story when Little Red is reconnected with her grandmother, who is Little Red's mother figure.
The wolf takes advantage of her, encompasses her, devours her. The historical interpretation is that Little Red is being reborn into womanhood.
I think that it's a really sort of an interesting image of, being contained in the stomach and sort of contained whole there. And I think that sort of during that period, that was very much the understanding of pregnancy, was that, the child was just a little person in the stomach, and they didn't really have an understanding of the fetus.
The wolf has devoured her innocence, and the hunter frees her from the wolf's abuse and welcomes her into womanhood. What does Little Red do next? What are the hunter's true intentions for the pretty young girl? And what does Little Red desire in return? Since there are no extant versions prior to Perrault which show the history as written by him, it would seem that his version is a conflation of one or more stories with similar adjectives, so to speak. That is, the cloak, the girl, the cannibalism, and the beast. Jan Zolkowski writes that the redness emerges as the central mystery of the story, eliciting interpretations that shift with the intellectual vogues of the cultures that produce the interpreters. Much ado has been made about her fetish of the red hood or cap. Clearly, her innocence has been suspect.
You're